G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to do a bit of a positive video about my story of being a West Coast Eagles fan and how I really came to love this club in the way that I do. And really, part of the reason I want to do this kind of video is because I would also like to hear from you. I love hearing different nuanced perspectives of the West Coast Eagles from fans and how they came to be the Eagles fan that they are, what their earliest memories were, what inspired them about the club. I think there's a place for this kind of video on YouTube and I want to hear from you in the comments as we go through. But I'm going to talk about, my introduction to the West Coast Eagles, what they mean to me and how, 20 odd years later, it's ultimately led to me trying to make a career talking about football and the Eagles. I'm 30 years old and I have been following the Eagles since I was about 8. Now, I grew up in Thailand and I didn't really know too much about what AFL was or the West Coast Eagles were until I moved to Australia at that age, which means that my first season of supporting the Eagles was 2002, and I was still getting to grips with the sport, and it's interesting, my perception of what the league was and what the Eagles were, what their brand was still, forming. But in the first year that I supported the Eagles, we came 8th. And I have distinct memories of us beating the Kangaroos at Manuka. Pretty sure Troy Wilson kicked 5 goals in that game and we snuck into finals. And that to me felt like a huge deal because my perspective and my perception of the West Coast Eagles was, to start, we were a middle-of-the-road club. Ultimately, now I'm able to look back and reflect on we're actually a pretty powerful and successful club, which is great. But at the time, we were underdogs. So finishing 8th was just an amazing result. I have memories of losing to Essendon in elimination final at Telstra Dome, as it was called back then. Pretty sure the score was 111 to 78. I was really good with scores back then, but again, I could be wrong on that. So that was the first season I had my real taste of the Eagles, and I probably still liked cricket more at that age, but I had well and truly become hooked. And 2002 happened to be Chris Judd's first year at the West Coast Eagles, so I've actually never seen a West Coast Eagles prior to Chris Judd. And it was interesting, my perception of him as well, because Ben Cousins was probably my first favourite player. He was the poster boy of the club at the time. And I had this distinct memory of being taken to the AFL store at the age of 8 or 9 or whatever I was in 2002. And Dad bought me my first football jumper and I was allowed to have any number ironed onto the back of it. And I remember being asked if I was going to get Ben Cousins' 9 and I got Chris Judd's 3. I was just very taken by this Chris Judd kid who I didn't know what it meant to be doing what he did at 19 years of age. And at that age, you're not consuming football media. You're not reading what people are saying. I had no idea that Chris Judd was going to be this historic player. I just thought, gee, he's entertaining. I'll slap 3 on the back, thanks. I think I had this feeling that I was one of the only fans that thought Chris Judd was good. And then turned out everyone knew he was good. But, it was interesting going through that 02, 03, to ultimately 06 period because the Eagles just incrementally moved up. We still made finals and then we'd make an elimination final in 02, 03 and 04, and I think we got slapped in all of them. Essendon in 02, Adelaide at Amy Stadium in 03, and I reckon Sydney in 04 at ANZ, we got, smashed in that game too. But my love for the Eagles was still building, and, I remember in the 05 grand final, we watched it at my friend's house, and, I didn't really care that much that we lost. I was still pissed off. I remember hating Michael Gardner. I don't know if that's justified, but at the age of 11, I was in September 05. I was very frustrated and sulky that we lost the game, but absolutely no real awareness of what it was like to be in a grand final and what it meant. I was lucky enough in 06, my parents bought tickets to the grand final in June, which was, a great call. It happened to be, not only West Coast playing, they're playing Sydney again. And we happened to win by a point in one of the greatest grand finals I've ever seen. And arguably, in my opinion, probably better than 18 as a game. But, for years, that was the best day of my life. And I think probably that was where I had the first bump up in Eagles passion because at least by that grand final, I knew at the time how much it meant to me. And no doubt I probably was taking our success for granted because, like everyone else after 07, when we lose Cuz, when we lose Judd, I still had this ignorant belief that, we'll be all right. We're still going to make finals. Are you serious? 2008 was an interesting year. So we'd moved over to the Middle East and I had to follow football by listening to 6BR and watching this live ticker update on the AFL website where they'd show the ball moving around the field, but it would be 2 minutes after the actual thing, so it was kind of useless. But that was how I consumed football from 2008 till I reckon 2011, was listening to it on 6PR. And those were tough years as an Eagles fan to some extent, especially if you'd never tasted being a bad team before, and that was possibly the worst we ever got. Saving for now, of course, and I had missed the Ken Judge era too. But round 1, we beat Brisbane, somehow, I don't know how. Round 2, we got slapped by Adelaide, and then in round 3, we lost the Derby. And I remember saying to my dad, and I was like, mate, just between you and me, I don't think the Eagles are going to make the top 8 in 2008. And he was just like, you know what? I think you're right, mate. It turned out to be one of the worst seasons the Eagles put together. I had no idea how bad we were going to get because I just hadn't seen it yet. So we finished second last in 08. 09's an interesting year. It starts, poorly as well. Then back end of that year, I think we won 4 of the last 5. Tom Swift debuts. He gets 3 votes in a random game against Richmond where we smash them, and the Eagles are coming. We're going to be back in the finals in 2010. Now, I don't really have a good memory of why we fell to be so bad in 2010 after a pretty good end to 09 where we played some pretty good football. I do think we did have a pretty bad injury list, and obviously the list was shallow back then. So, missing Lacroix and Hearn was quite devastating, let alone Daniel Kerr. He did rip his hamstring off the bone in about round 4 against Essendon, I reckon. But we win our first wooden spoon in 2010. That was devastating. And obviously Gold Coast came into the year that year, and I was starting to get into the draft. And I think this is probably around the period, ironically, at our lowest ebb, around about maybe 09, I think it was. That is where my passion for West Coast went from being, a pretty strong fan to being absolutely obsessed. And I think it has a lot to do with discovering bigfooty.com, which I know is absurd, but I think when I found this online community where there were other Eagles fans talking about what was happening in the games, and certainly being exposed to Eagles fans that certainly knew a lot about football than I did. And I actually learned so much about football that has ultimately held me in good stead for making content on the AFL. Now, there's people out there who probably think I don't know the first thing about football, but I'm going to say I learned a lot of what I do know from Big Footy. Now, the internet is not an amazing place to try and get your football opinions, but over time in that community, first of all, there was the sense of community. It was nice to be part of that. 15 years later, I'm still posting on Big Footy, and I still like the people that are on there. But you also learn, who switched on and who's probably not worth listening to. And there was also a period in my life, when I was interacting with girls, and I've made this point in a previous video, but I think there's some beauty to loving a football team in the way that we do. It's completely irrational, but I think what it does is provide something that you can love that can't really hurt your feelings. As cringy as that sounds, I do think there's a few aspects that I've just covered there. There's the sense of community with other Eagles fans. If you are exposed to and communicating with them, everyone that wants the same thing. Sure, there's argy-bargy online, but ultimately we are bonded by this one thing, and the community is really important to people. And then there's also the fact that it is escapism from the other problems in your life, and as a 15-year-old, I felt like I had problems. But the beauty of it is that, this is at least how I feel about football, is when things go right, you let it consume you. You feel all the ecstasy in the world. It's amazing. And if they lose, to some extent, you can kind of park that pain and just leave it because you can dismiss it as being just football. And I think ultimately, that is what makes football so great. 2011 was probably one of the funnest seasons as a West Coast fan. 06 and 18 obviously come to mind because we won the flag. But outside of that, 2011, where we made the top 4 after winning the wooden spoon and, had this new innovative forwarded press and unearthed Andrew Gaff, Jack Darling, Luke Shuey comes second in the Rising Star, Daniel Kerr's fit and firing, Andrew Embley has a great year to, one of his last seasons actually. That was just a really fun year as an Eagles fan, just smashing opposition expectations every single week. And then we did that again in 2015 after, finishing 9th in Simo's first year to obviously ultimately make the grand final. That was just one of the funnest seasons. And now that we have 18, I can just look back on 2015 as one of those years that was just a really fun ride. Now, there was one year where my Eagles love really got tested, where I just kept thinking why do I do this to myself? And it's funny in hindsight because that wasn't even a terrible year. I'm talking about 2017. We'd finished 8th, I think. And the last 2 games of the year were actually amazing. So that was the game where we had to beat Adelaide by 4 goals. The last ever game at Subi. And, Lewis Jetta kicks a late goal and we just sneak into finals, only to then go to Adelaide, beat the Power after the siren, and just shatter expectations. But that year generally was a tough year. The team itself was stale. We were playing the same game style over and over again. This is starting to sound familiar. And there was a refusal to just cycle in youth. I remember Luke Partington was famously not picked consistently despite playing well in the waffle. The AFL team was not playing well, but you would just see Wellingham and Jetta and Redden, who were not good players at the time. I say that respectfully. They took a while to come on, those guys. That was the first year where I probably just felt a little bit disengaged. I still love the Eagles, but I think it's pretty impactful to consider that in October of that season was the year that we founded True Footy and launched a YouTube channel that is, well, it's going stronger than ever in some metrics, and I'm, full-time on it now. And I do often rethink, what would my relationship be with West Coast now if I didn't try and make AFL a career and, start a brand new Eagles channel. It's interesting to consider. I think I'd always be a big fan, but in an alternate universe where I'm trying to make a career, perhaps in the corporate world, because that was the way my life was pointing at one point. I probably wouldn't have time for the Eagles in the same way that I do. And I don't think I would maybe care so much, but again, I don't know because I've always really been this diehard fan. But this ability to express myself about the Eagles and AFL generally has allowed me to lean into it and, probably give it an inflated sense of importance in my life, which does come with its downsides because I have commented before when things are going poorly for the Eagles, I can't just forget football exists. I have to front up in front of you guys and talk shit. But I do like it ultimately. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider. But funnily enough, we all know how it happened next year in 2018, brand new stadium, new rebranding, loved that. We refreshed our team song, and to that point, 2018 is my favorite version of the team song. Like, things were looking good. Dan Venables is fit. Liam Ryan, Junior Rioli come in. There's just this fresh feeling to West Coast, and we play well. But 2018 was, a particularly big year in my love for West Coast. It had some real extra meaning to me beyond just winning the premiership. So I have said this in previous videos, and I'm aware not everyone watches all of my content, but at the start of 2017, I did lose my mum to cancer, and 2018 just felt, it's hard to explain in a short, sharp video like this, but it did just feel like somehow the universe was repaying me for, a pretty awful event. So I got to be there with Dad. We'd obviously been through some hard times together as a family, got to be there on grand final day and win the premiership. And there's two reasons why 2018, I think forever, will be the premiership that means the most to me. And it's interesting to consider, will I care as much about the next one? It's possible. But two reasons. My real love for the club was born through this difficult period in 09-10 when the Eagles were a little bit of a joke. Not like now. Not like now. But obviously, we'd stopped being relevant. I'd followed all the drafts. I knew all of the Eagles relatively well before they'd even debuted, which gave me this extra sense of being invested. I just felt like I knew all the players so well, and they were also still older than me, which is another interesting point about the future. It's like every potential Eagles player now is going to be younger than me, and will I have the same relationship with them? I don't know. But anyway, I'd seen this club fall to its knees and ultimately win a premiership. And of course, the added context of having had a tough year the year before and life giving me that full circle moment, I think 2018 is always just going to stand on its own mountain in terms of importance and value to me. And that is ultimately why I don't think I can ever let this club go. And as bad as things get, and things are bad now, and partly the reason I'm making this video is because I'm in a negative funk with the Eagles at the moment, the injury list, people giving a shit for the preseason derby. Maybe it's therapeutic, but I do owe so much to this football club. And for that reason, I'll always be grateful. I'll never let them go. And to be honest as well, they've proven time and time again, when things are going bad, they do have this knack of getting out of it and becoming ultimately strong again. So I want to hear from you guys. What is your relationship with West Coast? There's a broad demographic on this True Eagle YouTube channel. There's some fans older than me who, have been watching since the 90s and late 80s. And then there's some younger fans as well who probably discovered the Eagles or their love for the Eagles during that 2018 sort of era where we were good. That's their introduction to football. So I want to hear from you, what your favorite players were, what the scene was like when you became an Eagles fan, what are your favorite memories, and ultimately I want to leave it on this note as well. In the same vein as how we recovered from the Chris Judd, Ben Cousins era, where it seemed like things were never going to get worse than that, and we became a powerhouse pretty damn quickly, what the club is going through now, I really don't think we're going to come back as quickly, given the position we're in. But you can be rest assured, absolutely, that ultimately we will be in a better place. And when we finally are, it is only going to be compounded and that much more fulfilling because of how bad it is now. So we're going to get there. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Cheers.